Welcome into another edition of the Hang Time Podcast. Sekou Smith here in Atlanta. My main man, John Schumann, is in New Jersey. John Hartz is behind the glass. As always, later in the show, we're going to be joined by Eric Horn of the Oklahoman to talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder and what they've got going on right now. Really interesting stretch of the schedule of this new year for them right now. Huge games, 4 straight national TV games that are really going to help put their season into focus for us. But first, as always, something about Wednesday night in the NBA. Huge games in Boston, Houston, and Oakland. The Celtics coming up with a huge win. Kyrie Irving with a knockout performance and some interesting comments after the game about conversations he's had with LeBron James and other people in the wake of all the drama going on with the Celtics. James Harden rips off another 50-point game, but this time in a loss for the Rockets. And the Golden State Warriors, Steph Curry is on some kind of vicious run right now. John Schumann, watching Steph, watching these Warriors, knowing that Boogie Cousins is on his way to that lineup, are you worried at all that Boogie disrupts the rhythm that Steph has right now?
That's my first thought. They've won 8 of 9. Their offense has been absolutely ridiculous over that 9-game stretch. They've scored 128 points per 100 possessions, which is about 9 points per 100 possessions better than any other team over that stretch. Mm-hmm. I watched the Denver game on Tuesday, and the one thing I noticed was that Denver was guarding screens where the guy getting screened goes over the screen and then tries to get back into play. And it's basically the most common defensive scheme around the league, mm-hmm. where the guy trails the play, the screener's defender, hedges for a little bit and tries to allow the guy getting screened to get back in the action. And the Warriors just wouldn't let that happen. So they would gain a little bit of an edge with the screen, and then the ball just moved too quickly for Denver ever to get back into the play. And so they just gained that advantage, and then they just never gave it up. Like you'll see lots of teams, where the dribbler just backs up and then the defender gets back into play and it's back to a 5-on-5 situation. Or he makes a pass and the next guy hesitates for half a second and then the defense recovers. But that just didn't happen with the Warriors. The ball just moved too quickly for Denver ever to get back in it. I mean, and they shot ridiculously, but one of the reasons they shot so well is because the ball and the players moved just so quickly for Denver to recover. It was a clinic in sort of how to take advantage of a scheme like that. And it wasn't just on the ball screens, it was off the ball screens too. There's one possession where I think it was Durant coming off a little cross screen from Green, and he catches the pass and Plumlee hedges over, to keep him from shooting a catch and shoot 3 from the top of the key. And he catches it and drops it off to Green in one motion. And then Draymond's got a clear lane to the basket. The weak side help comes and he just tosses up a lob to Looney. And it was just a clinic. Any advantage they had. There was one where Jokic scored in the post. Green inbounded the ball to Curry. He quickly passed it ahead to Durant, who was just beat, I think it was Torrey Craig, in a sprint down the floor. Now Murray has to come over, and Durant in one motion tosses a cross-court pass to Klay Thompson in the opposite corner for an open 3 off of a make. And it was just, they were just moving too quickly for Denver to keep up. So it wasn't just about shooting. It was just about
flow.
Offensive execution and just, really focusing on ball movement and player movement and just not letting up on that end of the floor. Their defense still, the numbers aren't there yet defensively, but I mean, if the offense is going to be this good, this is them, really finding their rhythm. And so, now you wonder, okay, Cousins comes in. Is he going to stop the ball movement? Is he going to be able to fit in with that kind of play? And obviously there's questions on the other end of the floor as well.
I'm wondering, is he going to be comfortable with the ball movement part? Because I don't care how much you try and adjust to play like that. It's a different way to operate if you haven't played in a system like that. I guess the Pelicans somewhat understood that in his time with them, but the Warriors, the way they just crushed the Pelicans, after Steph got loose, first player in NBA history to have 8 or more threes in 3 straight games. He went for 7 in the third quarter, against the Pelicans. And if there's a switch to be flipped, I would say that the Warriors have come as close to that point over these past few games as they have all season. They finally look to me And I'm not looking at their defensive numbers and whether or not they've gotten back to the level we're used to them on that end, because I don't know in this freedom of movement in NBA if that's possible. I'll make up my mind in the next couple of minutes if I want to go off on my rant about nobody playing defense this season or not. I might save that for another day. But they look like they're as close to nuclear warriors offensively as they've been all season. Clay's shooting it better now, of course. Anytime Kevin Durant gets 30 and 15 and it's an afterthought, that tells you how ridiculous Steph has been. I don't want Cousins to be a victim of his own game, the history of his own game, by coming in and disrupting that, looking for opportunities to get loose or to get going when you don't have to. Like you said, there's going to be so many instances where the Warriors are making the right pass and the right play that he won't need to try and manufacture opportunities for himself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately his best role might be with the second unit and getting some sort of post touches that way. We know they're going to start him, but he could just start and play the first 4 minutes and then come off the floor and then maybe play the bulk of his minutes with the second unit, where that unit's offense could be more tailored towards what he does. But we'll see. I mean, it's been so long since we've seen him play.
True.
And obviously it's a completely different team that he's playing for now. So we don't know what we're going to see from him. With the Pelicans last year, they really unleashed his sort of passing ability, his playmaking ability, something that we hadn't seen before. But like I said, that was with a lot of dribbling. It wasn't quick action playmaking. It was, him dribbling quite a bit and driving himself, but turnovers were an issue with him, even with all that. I had some stat last year, like he led the league in turnover ratio on drives, on pick and rolls, on post ups. Like it was, basically turnover city with him. But with that, you got, obviously some good scoring and playmaking. They would run pick and rolls with him and Anthony Davis, which was fascinating to watch. But so I'm very, very curious as to see what's going to happen with him in the Warriors offense.
10:30 Eastern on Friday night, we'll get a chance to see the return and the debut of DeMarcus Cousins in a Warriors uniform against the Los Angeles Clippers. James Harden shoot 58 points, back-to-back 55-plus point games, and they lose. The Rockets lose 145-142 in a wild overtime game at Toyota Center. My big takeaway from this, and everybody's looking at the attempted threes, the Rockets chucked 73s. Harden scores like a maniac, of course. He ran out of gas at the end of the game, and they double-teamed him. And he made the right play out of a double team. Didn't work out. So it's not like you hold him accountable for anything in the loss. It happens. To me, the bigger concern for the Rockets is how much longer are you going to be able to ride James Harden like this, and how much longer will he have the energy and the stamina to play at this level and still have something in reserve for the rest of the season and the playoffs in particular. He's got that cursed playoff history, where he can't get to this level in the postseason. I'd be worried about it if I'm Mike D'Antoni about leaning too hard on James Harden right now.
Yeah, I mean, the Clint Capella loss really hurts. I mean, we didn't talk about that on Monday because I think the news came across that he was out, right after we recorded. Because they don't have anybody else that can elevate and grab and catch alley-oops like Clint Capella. It seems like a simple thing, but it's really important to what the Rockets do, because if Capella's defender at all just hedges over towards Harden, he just tosses it up and Capella can go get it and finish. And that's an important part. Like if they're playing pick and roll and the opposing defense isn't switching and Harden gets downhill, Capella's man has to make a decision. And once he commits, that lob goes up and Capella finishes. If he doesn't commit, Harden, scores himself. And without the threat of Capella, that's an easier decision for that guy, right? Like he doesn't have to worry about Nene elevating as much, or what's his name, Hartenstein elevating much, or PJ Tucker when he's playing.
Or PJ Tucker when he's playing the 5 and Jared Allen is
so I think the 3-point attempts thing is going to stay there because they're just going to have to play 5 out for the most part and have Harden attack an empty lane rather than attack with a rolling Capella. So I think it's a different look, and it does put more of a burden on Harden. If you look at his numbers with Capella off the floor, his field goal attempts are up and his assists are down. And so he's going to have the ball. Obviously, getting Chris Paul back will help eventually. It's not a good sign that Eric Gordon couldn't finish the game last night in his first game back. That game, though, Houston was up 11 with less than 4 minutes to go in regulation and then up again 7 in overtime. It reminded me of a couple of games that the Nets lost. They were on the other side of those kind of collapses earlier in the season.
Yeah, Spencer Dinwiddie went off.
Yeah, he's had a couple of those. I think there was a game against Detroit earlier in the season where he hit like 3 threes in the last 5 minutes of regulation or something like that to bring them back. And he hit 3 in the last, I think, 26 seconds of regulation. He hit 3 threes to force overtime, and then obviously hit the go ahead and one in OT. But I mean, that's just a wild finish. Like, I don't know if you can draw too many conclusions from Houston losing that game, other than, their defense isn't good enough to win games when Harden's scoring 58 points. Their defense is obviously the bigger issue than what's going on offensively with that team.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to get to before we talk Thunder with Eric Horn of the Oklahoman is Kyrie Irving. He's been in the headlines a lot.
We talked.
Well, I mean, it's almost like he listened to my every word on our previous podcast and then answered it point by point, literally, with 27 and a career 18 assists, and it went over Toronto. And then afterwards, he kind of addressed exactly what I was talking about the other day, Shu. He even called LeBron and apologized for being the young, impetuous, star that he was when LeBron showed back up in Cleveland. I applaud Kyrie for showing this kind of maturity. I don't know that a public mea culpa was the right thing to do, because it might look like more grandstanding from him, from some of his teammates. But he said he had to call Bron and tell him he apologized for being that young player that wanted everything at his fingertips. Well, you really? That's great. That's exactly what you should have done before you started blasting your young guys, to the press, before you went off on Brad Stevens and Gordon Hayward, at the end of a game when you didn't get the ball. I mean, it's tough watching a guy learn these lessons on this stage. But it's almost, and I mean this, it's almost like watching a child star grow up and stumble before our very eyes with his huge moments and highest highs, lowest low, and this is all relative. It's basketball. It's Kyrie, for all we know, is a no frills off the court dude, never had an issue. So it's not like I'm concerned about his character, but just his ability to morph into the leader that he wants to be, having already been a champion, has been interesting. I think hopefully this little stretch has been cathartic for him and allows him to move on in a certain fashion, so the Celtics put behind them all this drama and just get back to playing at the high level we expected them to play at.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big win for them. I don't care too much about him bearing his soul after the game, I guess, but it was an important win for them. Obviously, beating Toronto at home, even within the game. I mean, he obviously hit the 2 or 3 biggest shots of the game. But even within the game, you could just sort of see the peaks and valleys of the Celtics. You can see how good in the second quarter, you could just see how good they could be. In the third quarter and early fourth, you saw, why they can struggle a little bit. Gordon Hayward looked ridiculously smooth in the first half and then rather clunky in the second half. And I think that's just what you're getting with him now, is just, you'll see visions of the player that he was and the player he can get back to being, but then you still see that there's a little bit of growing pains with him getting back from his injury. So, I think we just got to keep an eye. Like, I don't think last night solved anything. Well, it may have. It was a step forward. I don't think it's reason to believe that the Celtics are the best team in the East again. I think Toronto also has its issues.
You think?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
How so? What do you think?
Well, I mean, they sort of folded late game last night. They late game. I think they're just a little bit too reliant on put the ball in Kawhi Leonard's hands and let him do his thing. And we talked the other day about him passing the ball more often. I think I talked about it in the last one. I mentioned it in Power Rankings that he had a 5-game stretch where it was the most assists he's ever had over 5 games in his career. But still, I think there's a disconnect between his offense and the rest of the team's offense a little bit. And when they put the ball in his hands, they're relying on him, basically to shoot a pull-up jumper. You want to see a little bit more playmaking. You want to see some more options offensively, I think, down the stretch for them.
I'm not as concerned with the Raptors. I think they've shown us, at this point that they're capable of handling their business in certain ways. I am curious, though. I wonder how Kyrie's messages are being received by his younger teammates. It's been clear to me that there's been some bristling at the way he's operated, and I'm gonna watch these Celtics over the next few weeks just to see how they respond to all this, and if Kyrie can find the right kind of rhythm, in his leadership to stay on a path that gives them an opportunity to wash away whatever struggles they've had and move on to that next level through the course of this season. Speaking of teams that we are curious about, and I got a chance to see them in town this past week, the Oklahoma City Thunder. I mentioned that we were going to talk to Eric Horn of Oklahoma, and we'll do that now, about a Thunder team that, in my opinion, I wasn't confident that they would be able to become the team that I think they have in the Western Conference so quickly. And I credit a lot of it to just how good Paul George has been. I think he's been a clear difference maker for them, but also the growth and development of a lot of their young guys has finally come along. I think Terrence Ferguson has been really good, and they've done a lot of this without one of their main defensive pieces in Andre Robertson being in the lineup. But credit to the Thunder for coming around and really rounding out things the way they have. Eric, thank you for joining us first and foremost. I know you're busy. Road schedule for a beat writer is never kind. But before that loss to the Hawks on Tuesday, the Thunder had really made an impression on people. What was the point in this season, do you think, that the light kind of went off for them as a group and they really came into their own?
Thanks for having me. After they inserted Jeremy Grant into the starting lineup, I think that's really when things started to flow for them. Because remember, they started 0-4. And we see them a very long way removed from that because we've seen their defense solidify. Paul George has gotten past kind of the inconsistencies he showed in the first month. And a lot of that has to do with Jeremy Grant. Remember last year, Carmelo Anthony was sort of the weak link in that defense. Once they put him in Game 5 against Utah, they went on that crazy – or they put Jeremy Grant in. They went on that crazy run, and that's when you had Carmelo on the sideline kind of going back and forth, trying to get back on the floor, and Mo Cheeks kind of like having to calm him down or whatever. But so Jeremy Grant's really solidified their starting lineup since he's gotten in there. At one point, I think before the turn of the year, they had the best record in the league since they put him in the starting lineup. Patrick Patterson was supposed to be that starter at power forward, but Jeremy Grant's too good to not play with that starting group, and he makes everybody else's job a little easier because of his length and his ability to switch and guard every position. So that was really the turning point for them to solidify their defense. And then once they got their defense solidified, Paul George has really carried the offense in the past month and a half. Had a great December, and but this team's going to make their money on defense, man, because they just don't have enough shooting. But yeah, that was the turning point. Probably the game they lost to Boston, which made them 0-4, was actually the game where they started to turn it around.
Right. The schedule coming up is very interesting. They host the Lakers tonight on TNT, and then they're off to Philly for a Saturday matinee against the Sixers. And then in New York, for the Martin Luther King Jr. Day matinee at Madison Square Garden, then back home for a Tuesday night game against the Blazers, and then the Pelicans next Thursday. I mean, I know you can't get into season-defining stretches and all that kind of drama in an 82-game schedule, but this would seem like a very curious stretch of the season if only they're going to find out just where they stack up against some other teams that fall in that mix, in terms of groups that are trying to sort out, their position in the Western Conference in particular. And Russ hasn't been great. He hasn't shot it great right now. Is this an opportunity for Russ to kind of reassert himself? I know he's having a triple-double, and he's almost made that commonplace now, but I feel like he needs kind of a nuclear stretch of, Russ shooting it well and playing at a really high level just to kind of solidify what I think we're seeing from this team.
Yeah, this is going to be a big week. And I'm honestly, I was telling somebody this on the radio a couple of days ago. I'm just as interested in that game against the Knicks as I am the other ones, because you cannot afford to go to New York and lose. That's a team that's not even trying to win. They're developed. No, and look, and Fizz has come out and just said they're trying to develop guys. They're working towards the future. That's not a knock on the Knicks. They just know who they are right now, and they're not trying to win games. So the Thunder's got to go up there and beat those guys, and they have a propensity to go out to the LAs, the Atlantas, the New Yorks, and kind of let their guard down. That game, that crazy game they won against Brooklyn, they played poorly for 3 quarters, and then Paul George just got crazy in the fourth quarter. They went up to LA and stayed out there for 3 days earlier this season, and the Clippers beat them by 16. So they've got to show that they can be consistent against the worst teams, the bottom dwellers, to me, because with the strength of their schedule in this back half of the season, they cannot afford to have slip-ups against Atlanta, against Washington at home without John Wall. They've lost some really eye-opening games in the past couple of weeks that, it kind of goes against their strong start against bad teams. They started 13-0 against sub-500 teams, and that was a problem for them last year. They played so poorly against bad teams. You thought they had it corrected in this first half of the season, and now they don't. And yeah, like you said about Russ, I think Jeff Van Gundy said this on a broadcast a few weeks ago, and it's stuck with me ever since. It was before the midway point of the season or so. He said it's getting late early in terms of trends. And that makes so much sense to me when it comes to Russell. It's like we keep saying, okay, he's going to come around. He's a guy who gets better as the season goes on. Statistically, throughout his career, he's shown that. But it's getting late early for him in terms of, his free throw percentages, his shooting percentages throughout the season, taking the right three-pointers, which I think he's done. He's taken the right three-pointers more so this season. But frankly, instead of taking some of them, just moving the ball. And he's done it. So he's done it better than he has in other seasons, but he still needs to continue to stay on that track. He's had a cluster of games in the past few weeks where he shot, closer to where he's been in that, 48, 50% range. And I think he's put together a better cluster of those than he did in early December. But yeah, you got to get more consistency from Russell Westbrook, because he's going to be a guy with Paul George that's going to be taking a majority of your shots. He's going to be taking 20 shots a game. And if he's going to take that many shots, he's got to make 9, 10 of them, or he's got to get to the line at a high clip and make his free throws. And we just haven't seen a consistent stretch from that from Russell Westbrook yet. So it begs the question is, when is he going to hit that streak to where he can make up for some of the Thunder's defensive deficiencies we've seen in the last few weeks? Because when they had that defensive slippage, their margin of error is so slim to where you can't have Russell Westbrook be off the way he's been so far this season.
Eric, I was going to sort of bring up you mentioned the loss to Washington. You mentioned the loss in Atlanta the other day. They have lost 4 of their last 5, and that basically been their worst defensive stretch of the season. What is wrong with the defense over that stretch, and how concerned are they about that end of the floor?
I think pick and roll is a big issue with them right now.
Trae Young looked really good in the pick and roll the other day. I'll say that.
Boy, he ate them alive, and it makes me excited about the Hawks and what Lloyd Pierce is doing. That he has those young guys playing as confidently as he does. I think that they're going to be a problem in the East in the next few years. But even before that game, around mid-December, you actually started to see some shades of this. They went up to Utah. They won a 1-point game in Utah, where Utah ran the same play on these guys 3 times in a row with Rudy Gobert rolling to the rim, and just nobody rotated over, untouched, unmolested dunks, and Utah just kept going back to it. And you saw it against Phoenix. You saw it against Dallas. Some of the same things where teams would go through a stretch where they would just kill the Thunder and pick and roll, just pick them apart with that roller, either because the guy on the ball wasn't denying the ball quickly enough. The Thunder likes to play their center up high with Steven Adams up in pick and roll because, frankly, I don't think that they trust the guard to do a good enough job to deny the pass. They like to play that center up high, so that means your rotation has got to be on the backside. And the biggest problem for the Thunder last year was defending the corner 3. So naturally, that guy that's rotating from the backside is going to be kind of in a no man's land. He's going to kind of be like, okay, my instructions are to stay home because I want to prevent the corner three. But at the same time, we've got this guy rolling free to the basket. So what do I do? So I think that there's something's a little off right now with that rotation on the backside. And it starts at the top of the pick and roll. The guard's got to be able to deny that first pass. He's got to be able to deny the ball, make that opposing guard, go back through and recalculate and think for a second and kind of, dribble back above the 3-point line and restart the set. Because if that guard can just go through the set, then that's a complete breakdown. That's what you saw against Atlanta. You saw Alex Len rolling uncontested. You saw John Collins not having to take a single jump shot because he's just getting everything he wants at the rim. Because by the time he gets to the rim, he's going up against a small guy like Terrence Ferguson, or he's going up against a guard. So the Thunder's got to recalibrate there, and I think they will, because Atlanta was an anomaly to me in terms of the pick and roll defense for them. In those games I mentioned before, like Utah, Dallas, Phoenix, the Thunder had problems, but they corrected it within the game, and they ultimately won the game. Atlanta, they just didn't correct it, and it led to just one of the most embarrassing defensive performances I've seen in a long time from this team. So I think they're capable of correcting it. I think they will, and I think that those guys understand what they need to do, and they understand that it takes a particular level of focus for them to play good pick and roll defense consistently. They just got to do it, man. And I think they can. They got the guys that are capable of doing it. Jeremy Grant's, again, he's been great. Russell showed a little bit in that game where he slid over in terms of backside help and did a good job in that third quarter. That was the only quarter that they really played defense. And Steven Adams and Paul George they just have such great defensive instincts and positioning that they'll get it fixed. It's just they're in a stretch right now where it's been a big weakness for him.
I want to go back also to Westbrook's shooting. He's basically been the worst jump shooter in the league, high volume jump shooter in the league this year. And I'm always fascinated by it. You'll see him also, like, he'll go like 2 for 10 from 3-point range in a game, and then he won't take another 10 threes over the next like 3 weeks. And you can sort of see it like in his numbers. You just look at his game log and he's like, oh, he shot poorly from 3, and then now he just stopped shooting threes for the next however many weeks. Does he ever let you guys in on his thought process as far as his shot is concerned? I think it's for me, it's fascinating, but I know that with him talking to him, he's not going to exactly empty his head towards the media in regard to his thought process, why he's struggling with his shot in particular, whether he's concerned about it, whether he's been hesitant to shoot at times. Like, I want to know, like, what has he said about his jump shot this season?
Well, I think that Russell is really self-aware, even if he doesn't, make it so with us, and he never will. He'll never let us into this process of whether or not he should or shouldn't be taking threes. And the Thunder's always going to empower him on the record to take open shots. Because they're going to say they need him to take open shots. They also need him to find the best shot on the floor. And, a lot of times that's not him taking a three. I don't like throwing media guys under the bus, but I heard a certain guy on a game that they were, it might have been a road game. And I was listening to the broadcast from home when my beat partner was on that game. And one of the guys on the broadcast saw Russell Westbrook hesitate on a corner 3-point attempt. And the closeout was pretty solid from the team they were playing against. But Russell pumped, he brought it back down. And as he went through that process, the color commentator said, he needs to shoot that. He's too good not to shoot that. But like, as soon as he said that, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, just because a shot is open doesn't mean you should take it. And as you said, Russell Westbrook has been one of the worst jump shooters in the league. Like, statistically throughout his career, he's like he might be the worst high volume 3-point shooter we've ever seen. So again, the Thunder wants him taking better shots in terms of the places on the floor. Time and situation has always been an issue with Russell. But, like, on that particular play I was talking about, I think there was 8 on the shot clock. Russell pumps, brings it down. The commentator says he needs to take that. He's a good enough player. He needs to take that shot. No, but Russell moves the ball, gets it to Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder makes an extra pass to Jeremy Grant. Jeremy Grant attacks a closeout and does a great little Euro step and scores at the rim. it's not all about Russell Westbrook having to take a shot just because he's the best player. And I think that part of this season and part of the awakening for Russell and the Thunder is just because somebody's presenting something to you, the defense is sagging off of you 10 feet and inviting you to take a jump shot that you're not going to make, 6 times out of 10 because you're just not a good jump shooter. Move the ball, trust somebody else on your team to make a play with it. And he trusted the guy in that instance. And I thought it was a completely wrong observation by the color analyst. And I thought it was a great play by Russell. And we've seen him do that before. It's just a matter of doing it game in and game out, and doing it more consistently. I've talked about this on our podcast several times this year. I think we're going to have to see the Thunder go through some ugly losses throughout the stretch of the season and go through some games where you have Russell Westbrook go 3 of 10 or 3 of 18 or whatever, so that he can understand that he doesn't have to take that bad jump shot every time just because somebody's inviting him to. He can trust Steven Adams to, make a floater, or trust Jeremy Grant to break somebody down off the dribble, or trust Dennis Schroeder, to drive, draw 2 guys, and then kick out to somebody. It doesn't always have to come down to Russell taking a jump shot or creating an assist. Like, that's part of the maturation of his game. So I think, the quicker he understands that, the more they can get more out of the totality of their offense.
I like that. I do. And I was thinking along those lines, Eric. I talked to Paul George the other day, and I don't know if he was trying to speak this into existence or if he was just being positive and hopeful about what he thinks could be in the offing with Andre Robertson. Is there a timetable for his return? Because PG was talking like, man, if you think we're good on defense now, wait until we get Dre back in the lineup. He's like, and then we're really going to be something on defense. And I'm like, I wasn't even sure if it was in the cards that he's returning anytime soon, or if at all. What's the latest on Andre Robertson's potential return and sort of maybe a timetable for it?
Well, when he had the setback in late November, they were starting to ramp up his conditioning. I think that the last 6 weeks or so is really the part that's really hurt him is the conditioning, because he's going to have to basically get that. He's going to have to start that all over. So I thought that he was pretty close to being in contact practice. If he would have continued on the same track, he would have been in contact practice in December and probably ready to play sometime by now. Billy Donovan said, earlier this week, he's not close to playing in games. So while they haven't had a timetable, you got to think about the conditioning aspects of things. I wouldn't anticipate him being back before the break, the All-Star break. But your conversation with Paul is right. Like, if you get a guy like Andre Robertson back, some of the pick and roll issues you saw that have popped up in the past few weeks, Andre Robertson can single-handedly change the way the Thunder schemes to play defense. He destroys pick and roll by himself. He's a guy who he doesn't need and Steven Adams has said this several times, like, Andre can do that on his own to where I don't have to play up and pick and roll. Steven Adams can play in that gray area and he can either drop, play in the gray area to where he can deflect balls or any slotted passes in that pocket to the guy who's rolling, or Andre Robertson will just snuff it out by himself because he's so good at getting his body in position on the guard without fouling. He's physical, he's long, he's got great side-to-side, short burst athleticism, and that just makes everybody's job easier on the backside. That makes Paul George's job easier on the weak side to where he can kind of play free safety. Russell Westbrook can roam and do the things that he likes to do, which is not play defense. Not be super focused on defense. Russell likes to roam and play free safety on the backside and do stuff like that. And he can afford to do that more. Steven Adams can drop. Andre Robertson makes everybody's life easier, and it's kind of the reason the Thunder is willing to pay that guy the money they're paying him, because you don't have to have Russell Westbrook fighting over screens at the top of the three-point line. You don't have to have Terrence Ferguson and Paul George doing that. And credit to Ferguson, he's actually become a really good defender this year. And Robertson has a big part to play in that, because Robertson is a guy who works with him in film study. He's constantly talking to those young guys and giving them pointers and showing them, strategies about, how to defend certain players and how to position their bodies. So yeah, Paul's right, man. Like, Robertson's a game changer when he's healthy. And as good as the Thunder's defense has been, it just makes their margin for error even greater if they have a healthy Andre Robertson.
Last thing, Eric, before we get to our Schumann stat, and this is kind of a curious thing for every team, or that's either buying or selling. Trade deadline is coming up February 7th. You think the Thunder are in the market to make a move or to stand pat?
They should be in the market. It would help if a guy like Patrick Patterson was playing better, like Alex Abrinas was playing better, if Andre Robertson was even healthy, because you got a lot of question marks in terms of guys that you can offer to other people, because frankly, those guys either haven't played well or they haven't played well or they haven't played at all. But they should still be aggressive, I think. Sam Presti is a guy who's typically methodical in the way that he goes about trades. Sometimes he'll do some stuff on the margins to get them a little bit better in the short term, but then the stuff on the margins will parlay into something greater in the summer or in the off season. Getting a Taj Gibson and a Doug McDermott in Russell's MVP year, that made them better in the short term at power forward, but it was the long play. It was a guy like Doug McDermott being packaged to go get a Carmelo Anthony. So the Thunder might operate more so in the margins, particularly because of just how much money they have on their books. And in the buyout market, I think that they'd definitely be a player in the buyout market as well, because they have a mid-level exception to offer. They have a veterans minimum. They have a roster spot as well, to where they could absorb another salary. I mean, not another salary, but another body in a trade. And then they have a $10 million trade exception, but the Thunder has also let trade exceptions go by before too. So with that trade exception in hand, I think that they should be aggressive in looking for a guy, particularly a wing guy that can help them with their perimeter shooting, because you just don't know what Alex Abrinas is going to be when he comes back from his personal reasons. I would say that they should be aggressive, but at the same time, I've seen them for the past 3 years or so kind of just improve on the margins and not do anything blockbuster-ish. So I'd probably lean towards them being more on the margins than being a team that's going to go make a shock move, get somebody that's a big name. And part of that is, like, I know how they operate, and then part of it is they don't have a ton of assets to move, really. Like, they don't. Right. Like, somebody's going to ask them about Terrence Ferguson, and they're going to say no. Like, somebody's going to ask him about. Yeah, no, because he's 20 years old and he plays the position. That's the most valuable position in the league, like a two-way wing that you can develop. That's hard to come by. Like Hamidou Diallo is another guy people are going to ask about. And, the deal would have to be pretty rich for me to part with a Hamidou Diallo. He's 20 years old. He's super athletic, and he's got a lot of upside. So they have some interesting decisions to make. As always, it depends on what other teams are offering, and it depends on how teams value some of the guys they have. Because I don't think there's much value on Andre Robertson right now, except to the Thunder, because other teams don't know what you're going to get from a guy like that. Patrick Patterson, Alex Abrinas, that's a lot of question marks. So I guess it remains to be seen. That's a long way of me saying I don't have an answer. I just have theories.
Nothing wrong with that. I don't have answers when John Schumann cranks up his Schumann stat, Eric, and yet I'm going to let him do it again. Shu, what's our Schumann stat this week?
All right, fellas, you ready for this?
No, go ahead.
Paul George, over the course of his career, including playoffs, has taken 73 shots to tie or take the lead in the final minute of fourth quarter or overtime. This is a multi-part question. First of all, how many of those 73 shots do you think he's made?
Can I guess first?
Yes, sure. Please.
I'm going to say one because I am I wrong?
No. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's not.
But it's only 9, and that's 12%.
Yeah. Oh, wow,
man.
And that is the worst mark among 110 players that have taken at least 25 shots to tie or take the lead in the final minute of the fourth quarter overtime over the last 10 seasons. So 9 for 73, 12%.
Wow.
This year it's 1 for 8, with the 1 being the 3 to take the lead in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So the second part of the question is, over the last 10 years, there are 7 players who have taken at least 100 shots to tie or take the lead in the final minute of the fourth quarter or overtime. Mm-hmm. See if you can name those 7 guys.
Good grief. All 7 of them?
Sure. Should be fairly easy.
And you said over 100?
100, yeah.
Okay,
over the last 10 years.
You got LeBron.
LeBron James.
Correct. He's third with 133.
You got Russell.
Second with 166.
Okay.
Kevin Durant.
Yep.
Durant first, 172.
James Harden.
No. He's right below. I think he's at like 98 or 97 or 98.
Huh.
Stephen Curry.
Nope.
No Steph.
He's at 88. Harden was 96.
And what's the span of years?
10 years.
10 years.
Okay,
what about Dwayne Wade?
Carmelo Anthony.
Correct. 114. He's fourth.
Whew.
What about D Wade?
Dwayne Wade? No, he's has 99. He's eighth on the list at 99.
Okay.
Damian Lillard.
Damian Lillard, yes, fifth with 108. Two more. One guy is retired. One guy is not.
One guy's retired.
Kobe Bryant.
Kobe Bryant, correct. 100.
Okay, yeah,
exactly.
10 years, and one guy's not.
This guy basically takes every clutch shot for his team. He basically is the only guy shooting for his team in the last minute of the fourth quarter of overtime.
I'm drawing a blank. Kemba Walker.
Kemba Walker, correct.
Yes.
All right, of those 7 guys, who do you think has shot the best on those shots?
Whew.
Damian Lillard.
Second best, 38%.
Let's see. Who did we say? I'm going to go ahead and say
It was Durant, Westbrook, LeBron, Carmelo, Damian Lillard, Kemba Walker, Kobe Bryant. Lillard, we know, is second, but it's 38%.
I'll go ahead and say I'll say Durant.
No, 30%.
Oh.
This guy has shot 41% on those shots to tie or take the lead.
Please don't tell me it's Westbrook.
Nope.
Okay, good.
24%.
Because I was thinking that MVP year, like he was unbelievable in his MVP year doing that stuff. So
24%, which is
Please don't tell me it's
Westbrook.
the league average, by the way, on these is 32%, so it's not great. But this guy has shot 41% on his.
I'd love for it to be Carmelo.
It's not.
I know, but I would love for it.
He's at 30%.
That's an incredible That's an incredible percentage in those situations. Okay, so it's Kobe, right?
Nope, 34%.
Damn.
Who are we missing?
LeBron James, 41%.
That's incredible.
Yeah, including 32% on threes, which is also above average.
Right.
So it's a little fascinating list. The best of the guys who have taken at least 25, I think, was Al Horford at the highest percentage. Guys who have taken it's a fascinating list. Guys who have taken at least 25 shots to tie or take the lead in the last 10 years in the final minute of fourth quarter overtime. Al Horford, 24 for 41. Almost all of those are 2-point shots. And the only other guy who's shot in 50% on those is Marcus Thornton, 14 for 28, including 9 for 16 on threes. And then you get Anthony Davis at 49% would be third. So it's kind of a fascinating list. But
I'm surprised that Marcus Thornton has gotten 28 attempts in those situations.
He probably played only like 28 possessions on those. Yeah, but he was he's
like, give me the ball, man. I'll take the shot. I'll take the shot.
Awesome stuff. Shoot, thank you for the Schumann stat. As always, a brain twister if there ever was one. Eric, we appreciate you, man. Great information, great insight on the Thunder, man. We go to you on the Oklahoma website at all times to keep up with that team, man. It's going to be interesting to see how things play out the remainder of this season. So we'll be paying attention as always, man. Appreciate your work.
Thanks for having me, guys. Thank you. Thank y'all.
No doubt. Eric Horn of the Oklahoman joining us there on the Hang Time Podcast. People, we will have a slight hiccup in the schedule. Due to Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday, we will come to you on Tuesday, the day after. Bunch of great games on the holiday around the league. So we want to make sure we get a chance to talk those games, power rankings, and everything else. Kia Race to the MVP ladder will go up on Friday on NBA.com. Make sure you check it out. I have on good authority, I have a little birdie telling me that James Harden and potentially one Giannis Antetokounmpo might be at the top of that list. Shu, before we get off into another wild and crazy weekend around the NBA, there's a really cool project they're doing on NBA TV, and we talked about it a little bit last night, Derek Fisher and I with Ro Parrish, about the perfect player and what
LeBron
go into. Yeah, exactly. What goes into the makeup of the perfect player in today's NBA. Debut segment was on Wednesday night on NBA TV again, and each week over the next 2 months, NBA TV will try and build that perfect player with 8 different intangibles. Best handle, most athletic, best jump shot, highest basketball IQ, best defender, best vision, best body and size, and best intangible. Each category has 3 candidates, which were selected by a survey of GMs and coaches around the league. You know a little something about that, having to do the GM survey every year. This week it's best handles, and 3 candidates might surprise some people: Jamal Crawford, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. You can cast your vote on NBA TV's Twitter account until noon Eastern on Friday. So, Shu, which of these guys do you think has the best handle?
I would go with Kyrie Irving. I think his handle can get him places that of the 3, his handle is best at sort of getting him to the basket, if that makes any sense.
Or getting him the space maybe that he wants, wherever.
Right, whereas the other guys, I think they're more setting up jump shots, and that's great. I mean, and Harden gets – I mean, I shouldn't say that quite like that, because Harden gets to the basket quite a bit. But I think Irving's will, sort of set himself up to get to the hoop a little bit more than those other 2 guys. Jamal Crawford, it's tough right now because he's older, and he is very much just a jump shooter at this point in his career. Yeah. So
he is the godfather of having like one of the nastiest handles of his era, though.
Absolutely. I mean, he does.
And of all time, he's just
he's done stuff that nobody else has ever done.
Right.
But I'll just say Kyrie, just because I feel like it gets him to the hoop and can get him into spaces and draw the attention. Draw that second defender more often than maybe the other 2 guys.
I love the concept of this. It's interesting. The one thing they didn't have on the list of 8 intangibles that I thought was kind of interesting, and nobody asked my opinion, so I guess this is me just editorializing, but I was hoping they would have like the most clutch player or the most clutch category.
I just told you who that was.
I know, but I'm saying that would have, to me, that is a way of separating some other guys out of this mix, because there are guys who are going to have really high marks in some of these categories. But if I can't trust you with a game on the line, what good is all this other fancy stuff?
Is that shaded Paul George now?
No, it's just a general comment. I love Paul George. I'm not knocking PG. I think he's fantastic.
9 for 73.
I know. Look, you can't have it all, Shu. Can't have everything. But I agree. I think Kyrie's handle gets him and his team out of more tight spots than anybody, which is not easy to do in this league when you've got the athletes that you have capable of trying to compromise you with the ball in your hands. I think Kyrie's able to take advantage of everybody. Guys his size, smaller, bigger, whatever, more athletic, what have you. At his size, with his handle, to me, it makes Kyrie a lethal, player off the dribble, which is almost a lost art for a lot of guys. You don't have that much time to spend handling the way that Kyrie does normally. He's a Showtime player, no doubt, when it's talking about, handling the ball and playing off the dribble in this league. So for perfect player purposes, I think there's no doubt Kyrie wins in the best handle department. That's the first of the 8 categories. There will be one each week for the next 2 months. NBA TV building the perfect player, and we'll talk about it each and every week here on the Hang Time Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to Hang Time on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts for new episodes all season long. Every week, twice a week, we will bring it to you here. Don't forget to leave a review, and we appreciate you. We will see you after the holiday next time on the Hang Time Podcast. Hang Time Podcast.